As we can see here with the Köppen climate map, we have this puke green color, and we go down what puke green means. It means humid subtropical climate. So as the name implies, humid, it's going to be wet, so this is going to be an area in which we get a lot of precipitation, and that makes a lot of sense because we have a source area in terms of the Gulf of Mexico, but also the Atlantic Ocean for a lot of that moisture in the air. Also, as the name implies, subtropical because it's at a lower latitude, closer to the equator. Of course, we're going to get warmer temperatures. However, there's more than meets the eye. We're going to have some key temperature and precipitation variations between the upland south and lowland south, but we're also going to see some weather differences as well. So let's start off by looking at temperature. So first off, in terms of latitude, we can see the role of latitude plays a key role in understanding the temperature patterns we see here. Of course, it's almost perfect latitude in which warmer, cooler, colder, and so on as we go down the temperature gradient. Temperature patterns also, keep in mind, this is just showing 1 year. This is a particular year that might have an anomaly, but some other temperature characteristics is, on average, as we go farther inland, we're going to get more of the continental effects, and so we're going to get a bit more extreming. So when we look at temperature throughout the year, here's bigger fluctuations, especially as you go in the upland south. Upland south, because it's more continental, it's going to get much colder temperatures in the wintertime. However, when we look at the lowland south, because of its proximity to a coastline, it's going to have warmer winters. And so, of course, it's going to have warmer winters because of it being at a lower latitude, but it's also going to have warmer winters because of the moderating influences of a warm ocean or a warm water body, in this case the Gulf of Mexico. Another key reason why the lowland south on average has warmer temperatures besides latitude, besides proximity to a water body, is altitude. And as the name implies, upland south, upland, we're going to have a higher elevation, and thus we're going to have lower temperatures. And we can really see that when we go back to the Köppen climate map and we look at the Appalachian Mountains. We can actually see the Appalachian Mountains on this climate is different than the rest of Dixie, the rest of the South. Even further, we can actually see some precipitation characteristics in this particular climate map in terms of this lime green color, which is more similar to what we see here off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. And so what's going on there is hot, warm, muggy air from the Gulf of Mexico is essentially coming onshore, and with that bringing the humid air to the lowland south. But then eventually that warm moist air comes in contact with the westerlies, the predominant wind pattern in much of the mid-latitudes, but much of the interior part of the United States. And then essentially that warm moist air is then carried to the Appalachian Mountains, where it's being forced up. And then as it's being forced up, it eventually cools, condenses, and comes back down as rain. So here's the Smoky Mountains, which are smoky because they're kind of constantly misty because of this orographic precipitation that affects the climate and changes the climate in this particular geographic area. So later on in this chapter, I'm going to come back and say the southern Appalachians contains more biodiversity than any other area of the South. One key reason why, look at the climate variations. And so that's one reason why we're going to have the diverse array of plants and animals, because we have a variety of climates based on different temperature characteristics, precipitation characteristics, and essentially where you are in terms of the Appalachian Mountains. Are you up at a highland area or are you down in a lowland area? It explains a lot of the variations. Let's look at some precipitation characteristics that we also see. So generally speaking, the lowland south has higher precipitation levels, and so that's what we see here. Blues mean higher precipitation. But just in general, we can see throughout much of the area we call Dixie, we see a lot more precipitation. So we see it throughout much of the year. Now what's going on here, this is a particular 1 year, and this is actually an anomaly. They're having a major drought in this particular area. And so this is, if this was an average climate map that showed over the course of 20, 30 years, this would all be very blue. And so this just speaks to the anomalies of a particular year. And so you might have 1 year in which it's a drought, 1 year that might have a huge amount of rain, but on average, because that's what climate is, on average, all of this particular area of the South gets consistent rainfall. Now this makes sense because we have all this warm, moist air and all these water bodies in this particular area of the country. And whereas over here, we got more of a dry area, more high pressure. And so here we have a lot more precipitation. So flooding becomes a major concern here. Now, in upland South, flooding is a key concern. And I'll talk about this later, but what they essentially have done to rectify the flooding concerns from having all that precipitation and steep slopes, all of a sudden flooding it, the river floods and might, devastate a town, is they're starting to dam up the rivers. And so essentially building dams to kind of protect settlement from, let's say all of a sudden there's a major rain event, then that it'll be protected. And so building up the dams has been a way to kind of prevent the flooding problems. Now in the lowland South, flooding is a key issue. And so that explains why we have a lot of swampy areas, especially in those low-lying flat areas. And so it's, these low-lying areas in which water essentially stands, it doesn't go anywhere, has been a big hindrance for a lot of development over time. Now that's changed as over time in the American South, especially the coastal areas. What they've done is essentially developed more land and essentially have taken away nature's natural sponge, which are swamp areas, to kind of soak up all that rainfall, soak up all that moisture. When a hurricane comes through, to soak up all that rainfall from a hurricane. However, when you take away that sponge, you now have other problems, other issues, and so this is going to become more and more of an issue in the American South, especially as development continues in these low-lying swampy areas. Also, another key concern are tornadoes. Now, tornadoes happen everywhere in the United States. But in the American South, one of the things, especially the lowland South, especially this particular area, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, the thing that makes it different than other areas of the country is tornadoes can happen year-round. Whereas in Indiana, typically is more of a springtime thing. Now, it definitely is the case. April throughout, much of the eastern part of the United States, April is by far the biggest tornado outbreak month. However, when we look at in November, if a tornado happens in November, you see it on the news, a good chance it's somewhere here in the American South, particularly the lowland South. So tornadoes can happen everywhere, particularly the lowland South. Even further, another key concern in the lowland South, another hazard, is hurricanes. And so especially there along coastlines. So hurricanes, I'm going to talk more about when I talk about Hurricane Katrina in terms of explaining key concerns when these suckers make landfall. Finally, let's talk about temperature in terms of the occasional snow outbreaks that occur. It'll be more likely to occur, of course, in the upland South. It is rare to have snow, but it does occur there. Also, you're going to find snow up in the Appalachian Mountains, up in the higher elevations, of course, with kind of corresponding with orographic precipitation. But whenever there's freezing in the South, particularly that are the kind of along the transition between the upland and the lowland South where it's more likely to occur, places like Charlotte, places like Atlanta, places like Birmingham, Alabama, when they get ice, the whole city shuts down. So in general, the American South, they don't get a lot of the cold temperatures, but when they get a cold snap, when they get some snow, when they get some ice, it is a major catastrophe because they're just not prepared for it. A lot of these towns don't even have snow plows, don't even have salt trucks, and so when this happens, it shuts down the American South.